What age did everyone move out of their parents' house? Enjoy the show, everyone. What time did you move out of your parents' house? Story 140. Because I made bad financial decisions in my youth. My brother got all the wisdom in that department. Parents didn't mind, though, as I helped out with housework and cooked occasionally. I also paid my share of the cell phone bill and for my car insurance. Story 221. Pretty much when I started to live on campus at my university. I didn't realize the moment I moved out a quarter of my belongings out of my bedroom, I wouldn't sleep over in that house again. The worst part is that every year it would look less and less like how I kept it. Just saw my childhood be stripped away until I moved the rest out. Story 3. At 16, my best friend seen my mom hit me. She grabbed me by the arm and told me I never have to come back. It was the first time someone finally saw the life I had to live being at home. I moved in with her parents, who love me to this day. I got most of my stuff, but left most of the bigger items, started over, graduated, got a job, then we moved into our own place at 18. I am 26, now had some downfalls. On disability, but still figuring it out. Story 418, went away to college. After 2 years, still hadn't figured out what I wanted to do, so moved back home and finished at a local university. Had to go an extra semester to get all my credits for my final major. Moved out 3 months after graduation, not quite 23. Never moved back into my parents' house, but did move back to the area at 38, after living halfway across the country until then. I am so glad I moved closer to home and got to spend more time with my mom. The 18 years I had with her before she passed were priceless. Story 525, I think. Lockdown in my country had just begun, and my spouse and I had a 4-month-old with us. Her parents had to work every day, one at the port, one at a pharmacy, so we were super exposed living with them. My parents, on the other hand, my dad is retired, and my mom was fully remote. Plus, they lived in a semi-rural area, whereas my in-laws lived in the middle of the city in an apartment. The fresh air was nice, but having 2 families living under the same roof is extremely stressful. I didn't want to go back to her parents' place, and she didn't want to continue staying with my parents. So one night we hopped online and found a small 1-bedroom apartment in a nice suburban neighborhood well within our budget. Due to lockdown rules, we only got 2 hours every other day, depending on your sex, to leave the house and run whatever errand you had to run. So, in my 2 hours, I went on my own, saw the apartment, signed the lease, and within a couple of weeks had to do the move by myself since weekends were strict lockdown for everyone and no one was allowed outside. I packed up and drove to the apartment in my 2 hours and spent the weekend by myself getting everything ready. My spouse and the baby had gone to her parents' house to wait until I was done, since their house was only 10 minutes away, versus the hour-long commute from my parents' place. I spent the weekend eating delivery food and cheeseburgers from the air fryer, because the gas for the stove was empty. Come Monday, spouse and baby are with me in our own apartment, where for the next year we got to see my son grow. Made great friends with our neighbors, small building, and everyone was WFH, so we had barbecues all the time in the common area. And honestly, even with all the scary things going on in the world at the time, it was nice to just be in our own space enjoying each other's company every night. We've moved a couple times since then, though, but now my parents live a block away from us and have my son at their house every afternoon after school while wife and I work. Her parents are retiring soon and no one knows what they will do, but they still live only 10 minutes away, so we have a whole village to help out with our kid, but we still get to have our own space at the end of the day. I love my parents and in-laws very much, but I like having my own space from them. Story 6 at 18 and then again at 25. I could have moved out sooner, but I was a little hesitant. When my sister's roommate flaked on her, I took the opportunity to move in with her as a sort of stepping stone. It also helped calm my parents' fears a bit, since both their kids were in the same place so we could A, watch out for each other, and B, they didn't need to worry about my sister's new roommate ghosting her, or did they? I still live about 30 minutes away from them. We live in the Metroplex area of Texas, so I didn't need to go far to find work, which is certainly convenient. Story 7. I was 18 when I first moved out. It wasn't that I had issues at home. I love my parents, and I never minded being there. I started making income at 16. A very decent amount actually in a niche field at the time. I was paying a lot of the bills and had total freedom. I had just, at 18, started dating someone I would be with for 2 years. We, of course, lived together. I moved back after him, though, and was home again a few years. My true moving out was when I was about 23 years. I will be 36 in August. But even that is mostly because we sold our family home. My parents moved to NY to be near family, and I stayed behind in FL to remain with my spouse. I am still with him. Story 8, 15. I got pregnant when I lost my virginity. I was sent to live with my boyfriend and his mother. A few months later, I had a breakdown because I missed my younger siblings and reality smacked me very hard in the face. I quit high school and worked full-time as a grocery store cashier and worked on earning my GED at night. As soon as I turned 16, I got my license and bought a used vehicle, and a few months later took the GED test and passed. The following day, I gave birth. Life has been a wild ride. I married my boyfriend, and we've been together ever since. I'm 35 now. Story 9. Moved out at 18 for college. Moved back in full-time at 22 after college. Moved out for real at 23. Moved back in at 26. At this point, my parents are showing their age, and I don't have any siblings. I love my parents, and I don't plan on not living with them anymore. I don't really understand the social pressure to move out of your family's home. My parents and I are the only family we have. Why would I buy a house when they already own one? They weren't happy when I went out of state for college, and they were very unhappy when I moved out after college. They want me here, and I want to be here. Story 1018, moved back in. Small apartment above a barn on their new property. At 28, after I got out of the military and my wife was going to school, gave me an opportunity to save even more for a house. Although we had paid off all debt and saved a lot while I was still in, and really helped with the transition out of the military. Stayed around a year, paid utilities, and helped out around the farm. Have always and still do have a great relationship with my parents. I fully appreciate the advantage of having a family that is both willing and able to help when needed. Story 11. I moved across the country 2 days after my last college exam at 21 and ended up renting out my grandparents' basement apartment for a discounted rate. I was shocked at how little they expected and ended up paying them double out of guilt. Helped them avoid moving into a home for a few years. I was able to buy my first house at 24. Wouldn't change a thing about how I did things. I'm very grateful for how it all worked out for everyone involved. Story 1220. I lived at home for the first couple years of college, but then moved out to live with a partner. Dropped out of college shortly thereafter, and have been either living with partners/roommates/solo since then. My mom has told me I can come live with her anytime I like, and we have a great relationship. I prefer independence, but have considered moving back in to save on rent. Story 13. I'm staying until they kick me out LMAO. Sure, it would be nice to live by myself and have more peace and quiet, control over my surroundings, but I'd also miss spending time with my family, and to be honest, I probably don't have the skills needed to live by myself full-time. My mom grew up in a multi-generational household, and it'll be the same for me, my siblings, and probably the same for any of our children too. Story 1425. I lived there through college. Even though I lived in the dorm a good 3 hours away, most of my stuff was at home and I'd drive back frequently to visit and stay for vacations and all summer. After I graduated, I was there about 6 months or so, and then moved out. I generally liked living at home and had a great relationship with my parents. I'd probably have stayed living with them another 10 years or so, but we all felt that it was time and that it'd be weird living at home and trying to date. Looking back on it, I probably should have stayed there for another year and built up savings furniture and moved out once I was really financially secure and had a steady job. The first 2 years out of college, I was a substitute and barely made my ends meet. Rent was brutal, as was my car payment. If I could have saved that rent and electric, minus whatever my parents asked me to contribute, I could have had a much different life afterwards, especially once I dropped subbing and got a full-time job. Story 15. When I graduated high school, literally the week before, my mom got sick. I stayed home to take care of her and I was her primary caretaker. Went to community college, then another local, and I just never left. I love my mom and she needs my help, and I need hers too. Almost all my friends from high school have moved out of state, and I've always been an introvert, so I don't particularly crave the situational independence that comes with living on your own, or with roommates. I'll probably stay with her until she needs a home or dies. Story 1618. They started charging me rent. They were good parents, but they were trying to teach me a lesson that was a bit too harsh at that age. I was fresh out of high school and I worked for Taco Bell. Instead of being able to save money, I was making minimum wage for $25 HR at the time, and giving my parents $150 a month. Paying rent and also following someone else's fairly strict rules was a no-go for me. I found a friend and moved out. I was paying a bit more in rent, but it was my own place and I had no rules. I also eventually got a better paying job, so it worked out. I lived paycheck to paycheck for a very long time, but at least it was my own place. Story 1717 for school. Came back the following summer, then spent my summers living in the student housing working. I love my family, and I was only one city over. Saw them at least once a week, but I loved being a messy, independent young adult more. Spent ages 21, 23, traveling around the world. Moved out to my own big girl home with no roommates at 23. Edit. For those wondering about affordability, my summers were filled with factory work, and as a bottle service girl, I applied to and received as many bursaries and scholarships as I could get my dirty hands on. I also worked bottle service during school too, saved a lot of money that way, and I was lucky to have adults in my life to help me grow it. My student rent was $350/month. I made 2-3x that in one night. Story 1827-ish. Conning drone a minority background. We aren't really pushed to move our ands. We all had great relationships with my parents. Went to college locally, then farther away during bachelor's. Came back and my parents told me to stay as long as I like to save money for a house, marriage, etc. Sure enough, I met my wife who also lived at home. We got married and moved out for a bit to LA. When we decided to buy a home with 2 kids, our parents were supportive, so we lived with my parents for 6 months. Then again, 6 months Witty be hers. It was worth it to be able to buy our home in California early in our kids' life's AMD. We still maintain great relationship with our parents. I would do same for my kids. Encourage and nurture their desire to grow, but give them a safe environment to save money and move out when they are ready. I heard too many horror stories of people me and out 18 in this economy not being prepared or educated. It's not the same as it used to be. Story 1930 and living with my mom and brother. When I turned 26, I moved out and lived with my best friend, but moved back home when I was 28. Wasn't a coincidence, but just so happened to be at the same time my father passed away. So it was a good thing. Due to the economy, I'm kinda struggling to find a place that's not crazy expensive. My mom isn't bothered by my brother, and I still living at home since we have a strong family bond. We both pay rent and buy everything ourselves. Do my own laundry, cook and clean. More than my mom does, haha. But I love for her to have a clean home when she comes home from work and is tired. I'm from Europe, and in our country, it's not as common as for some other cultures to still live with a parent at this age. So I sometimes feel ashamed for having to tell people when the topic arises. One positive thing is that I am able to save some more money this way, but I feel that it is hindering my personal growth in life to not have an actual place of my own. Story 2018. I finished high school and got my first apartment a couple months later. There are a lot of reasons. I'm a bisexual trans woman and my parents conservatives. Our relationship can be strained at the best of times. I did briefly move back in for about a month after my divorce while I found a new place, but I don't really count that. Honestly, for that month I barely saw my parents between their work schedules and mine. Story 21. You have severe ADHD. It was never diagnosed because you went under the radar, because your parents were dealing with your siblings. You're not dumb, you just need to figure out how to manage it. Trade school will suit you. You like men, it's not a big deal. Date a lot and find what you are compatible with. You'll learn how you need to grow from those relationships. Learn to communicate. Don't be afraid to show who you are to the world. Religion is bullshit, and the faster you accept there isn't a man in the sky that will save you, the faster you can have real growth in your life. Bitcoin hits 50K. Story 2221 and ended up moving in with my then boyfriend, now husband, and his mother. We still live with her today, and I cannot wait until both cars are paid off so we can buy our own place and be away from her. My mom and MIL are 2 peas in a pod. Narcissistic, abusive, self-entitled jerks. My dad, on the other hand, was phenomenal. Hubby and I have told him countless yes, that if he were to ever divorce my mother, then we would go in on a house with him. I hope he leaves her soon. Story 23. Either 19 or 29, depending. I went in the army at 19. When I got out, my parents offered to let me live at home while I went to college. I moved back in and lived with them from age 25, 29. It was actually a wonderful time in our lives. They were older, more laid back, and we were all in a really good place in life. I'd been on my own long enough that they didn't feel a need to parent me, or even care to. I grew up the youngest of 4 kids, and that was the only time it was just the 3 of us at home. I really bonded with my parents in a special way during that time. Story 24. I officially moved out at 31. After a big breakup, I was at a loss and couldn't afford to be on my own. They gave me the option to be at home with them until my student loans were paid off 2 years later. During that time, I paid them a monthly rent we agreed on, helped purchase groceries and cook meals, took over mowing our lawn. My dad never asked, but I insisted on taking it over since they are older, and helped any other way I could. Our house layout made it so I had my own space in the house with my own bathroom so we didn't feel like we were in each other's way. Them allowing me to be at home for a few years allowed me to completely pay off both my undergrad and grad degrees and save enough to now live on my own. I am fortunate enough to have always had a great relationship with my parents and so thankful for them. Story 2516. Raised in a Mexican household. Mom always wanted me to make my own money and help her out. She got me fake papers, and I started working at 15 full-time while going to school. Mom kicked me out and started living with my first girlfriend from high school. Her mom let me live there, but I had to be pretty much a Mexican servant and not even look at her funny, because she would yell at me. Crazy her mom let me live there, but her mom was a nurse getting her PhD in nursing, so I guess I made her feel safe knowing someone would look out for her daughter. Story 26. Didn't have a choice at 18. The month I graduated from high school, my mom told me my stepdad's SSI for me, which I didn't even know existed, expired, so I had to figure shit out entirely on my own. No heads up, no warning, no help, no apologies, just awkward laughter. She never taught me shit. She did the bare minimum to keep her kids alive, and she ignored every question I ever asked her. It's upsetting to say the least. Story 27. Partially at 18. Moved an hour away for university, lived in residence or nearby rental units for my time in school, but lived at home in the summers because I had a good recurring summer job in my hometown. After I graduated, I was out on my own with roommates. My dad had a rule: you can live at home while you're in school still. But once you're done, if you're living home, you're paying $500 a month for rent and buying your own food, contributing to groceries. At that time, 20 years ago, rent would have been about $600, $800 a month for a 1 or 2 BR apartment, so I just moved into one with a roommate. Story 28-21. I was in college and working for a beer distributor. I was actually supposed to move in with my grandpa. He was building an apartment for me in his new house, but there were some months-long construction delays, and in the meantime, my dad had a whirlwind relationship with this crazy woman and decided to marry her, and she took it upon herself to start placing insane rules on an adult male, like no female visitors and having to be in bed by 9 and shit like that. I never obeyed her rules, but my dad was so whipped he started giving me 9 kinds of hell about it. So I finally had enough and moved out to my own apartment, and I've been on my own ever since. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.